Hello, the program is Stan the History Man, and I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. We'll do something a little bit different today and do a book review. Okay, there we go. The book is called Young Elizabeth, all right? And it's by Kate Williams, came out in 2015. And so it's a good book, and I read it all through and through, and I liked it. But there are some amazing historical mistakes in here that I just wouldn't expect a well-known writer of fiction and nonfiction to make these mistakes. And we'll just take it from the top, if you will. The Tsar, it said here, the Tsar, that is the Tsar of Russia, the last Tsar, Nicholas II, made the decision to depart from Russia personally. He didn't depart from Russia. He went to the front to take control of the army and made a total botch of it. And while he was there at army headquarters, he abdicated. But he certainly didn't leave Russia personally. In fact, he stayed in Russia and was killed by the Bolsheviks. That's on page 23. King George, later on, down on page 27, King George V in 1917 made the decision to, they changed the title from the House of Saxe-Coburg, the royal family, to the House of Windsor. And she says he made the decision, King George V, to allow his children to marry British subjects. Well, I'm wondering, well, of course they're going to marry British subjects. I think the people would be outraged if they didn't. So I don't know what she's talking about there. She talks about the stock market crash of 1929 caused by the breaking or the fallen house, that bubble, she called it, the housing price bubble collapsed. That didn't happen back then. I don't know if it certainly wasn't a very important cause of the stock market crash. It was the stock market crash. The prices on the stock market collapsed. Again, that's on page 51. I don't know where she got that. She's writing about events around 1932, and she uses the year 1932. I'm not absolutely sure she's using that year, but around that time. And she talks about the post-Depression era. Well, the Depression went on right from 1929, well, say 1930, 31, to 1940, 1941. Some people do think, I read this occasionally, that the New Deal or Franklin Roosevelt lifted us out of the Depression. As a matter of fact, there's a PBS television documentary, The Roosevelts, in which they say he lifted us out of the Depression. He didn't. The Depression was less severe with the New Deal, and also he made us feel better about it. Happy days are here again. We didn't end it. So there's no post-Depression era. And she's talking about England. Well, certainly in England, they were in the Depression. The 1920s weren't even that great. So that was on page 57. Then she talks about, roughly the same time, Hitler coming to power in the Depression, and the Germans were very upset about the Depression conditions and so on. And Hitler basically promised to destroy the Treaty of Versailles and end the Depression. He really didn't talk that much about the Jews. That comes later. But anyway, but she talks about the Germany of that time suffering from inflation. And I've seen this sometimes too. The Depression was depressed. Prices went down. They were depressed. Okay, we just sort of automatically assume, well, if it's bad times, it must be inflation, and that's not true. That's on page 91. Okay, so but the worst howler of all was on page 217, in which she says that the Princess Elizabeth's wedding gown, they wanted to make it out of silkworm, use silkworms for silk for the gown, but not of any country in which England was at war. And so that excluded Japanese silkworms, which is usually the first choice. And they said, well, we'll get Chinese silkworms because China was neutral in World War II. That'd be news to 25 million Chinese who died at the hands of Japanese from 1931 to 1945. Now, maybe Japan never declared war on China, but it's certainly anything but neutral. In fact, China is considered one of our allies. And Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese leader or dictator, met with Roosevelt and Churchill at, I believe, Tehran in 1940, one of the big three and big four conferences. So anything but neutral, and that would outrage any Chinese. And we were fighting long before you guys ever got in the war. We were at war with the Chinese 10 years before Pearl Harbor. How can a writer, a well-known, reputable writer, ever make a mistake like that? So to sum it up, it's a good book. I enjoy reading it. She's a good writer, but does she read any history? I don't know. Anyway, the book, again, in case you're interested, is Young Elizabeth by Kate Williams. Okay? So anyway, that's Stan the History Man, and I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. Thanks for watching.